It's time to talk about AI War 2, and this could be a bit difficult actually because there's a lot to say about this game, and no particularly easy way to get it across, I think. What I'm going to be doing here is running through a couple of campaigns in the game, and talking mainly about how the mechanics differ from other games that are like this game. On the face of it, this game completely embraces and exemplifies the tropes of the space strategy game genre. We're some dots, we're going to conquer some blobs in space, and there are lines between the blobs that dictate where you're allowed to go. However, it differs from games that are like that normally in just about every other way. And the challenge for me playing the game was not only to learn its unusual mechanics, but to try and work out, are these better than the usual mechanics? If it was more generic, would it be better in places? Or do I actually like the way that it's unusual? My views on this matter have certainly changed while playing the game, and they'll probably change more as I gradually put together this commentary. So we'll see, basically. Well, let's just look at the basic gist of what's going on. We have spaceships in space, we need to go and capture some other blobs, but the big gimmick of the game is that we're facing an asymmetrical warfare situation where the entire map is already controlled by your opponent, and you have to try and conquer the map essentially in the fewest moves possible, because the stronger and more powerful you get, the more stronger than that the opponent will get. Essentially, the game will react to you trying to strengthen your position by just coming in and absolutely taking you downtown, because the enemy is vastly stronger than you. The only reason you're in the game at any given point is that the enemy has not bothered to attack you. So you sort of have to be stealthy and essentially try to game the AI, which of course is the sort of thing you would normally want to do in a strategy game anyway. But now, your exploitations against the AI are intentional, or to put it another way, the AI not just easily crushing you when it could, is a feature. The bad AI is a feature, that's what I'm saying. You're supposed to be able to beat the AI, but the AI is also supposed to be, in theory, much stronger than you. So you're walking this fine line between being destroyed at any moment and being able to effectively walk around the galaxy freely, because the AI just doesn't really pay that much attention to what you're doing and doesn't really care if you don't get strong in certain ways. We'll have to go through that as we go along. Here's a brief look at the combat. We're not really going to look at the combat too much because it's essentially just the icons shooting lines at each other, which for me is ideal, because while it looks absolutely terrible if you zoom in on it, and it's very tropey, as mentioned, it's basically the most simple possible space game combat system you can have, where it's essentially just a number fighting another number and you see what happens. There is a very complicated and theoretically deep system underneath, like something like Total War, where all of these things have tooltips with enormous numbers of stats and the way the stats interact with each other and the strengths and weaknesses of certain ship types against other ship types. Well, there's just loads of them. Pretty much impossible to know what they are for a beginner like me, but something's going on there. Essentially, we're just going to be throwing death blobs at each other and we'll see what happens. Now, I've captured this system next to my home system, and there's a number at the top that says 30 AIP. That's like the main stat of the game. That's how much the AI is paying attention to what you're doing. And the more attention it's paying, the more it actually tries to play against you. And there are certain thresholds where if you reach that amount of AIP, all of the AI's units just get bigger numbers attached to them. They just become stronger and the game will just become harder if it notices you a certain amount. So it's going to notice you if you're capturing territory or taking out key infrastructure, but sometimes you can make it notice you less by taking out data centers or by just not capturing territory and embracing your own weakness, so to speak, essentially to not play the game like a normal strategy game. If we were to just capture territories in a continuous line so that our border size was minimal and our defensive qualities were maximized, that would make the game harder than just sort of randomly taking systems in random locations and just skipping over areas in between, leaving the enemy fleets there, just running past them as quickly as possible, doing weird things that normally might be an exploit in another game. It's the intentional playstyle in this game, and I found that kind of difficult to get into. One thing I'll say about the sort of getting into the game aspect is that it does have really good tutorials, and the tutorials are very meta, I suppose. They contain loads of meta information that I always want to see in tutorials, like even telling you how much of the tutorial you're supposed to understand from the developer's perspective, because the game's quite complicated in the depths of it. It goes out of its way to say, like, right, even if you don't really know what I'm talking about, you can still play the game if you understand at least this amount of what's going on. Things like that, which I think is really good tutorial information to give. And it also has a pretty in-depth wiki in the game itself, so it's very easy to look things up. The UI itself is kind of complicated and confusing, and things that are really important are put alongside things that aren't important. So it's a little bit hard to, on the face of it, work out what you should be paying attention to, but that's something you get used to over time. It's always easy to criticize that, because from the developer's point of view, those weaknesses will be virtually invisible because they're so used to not thinking about it like that. Well, as I came in, there's these various numbers at the top, there's all sorts of things going on the left on those sidebars. Some of them are very important, some of them are all but useless, especially when it comes to the tech system of the game, which is another counterintuitive system where some techs will do literally nothing in certain circumstances, but you'll still have to pay vast amounts if you want them, and you have to sort of know what's going on. Basically, you need to know not only what your fleet's particular stats are, you need to predict in advance what future ships you're going to get, and only buy techs that will affect things you think you'll get in the future, and knowing that sort of thing requires experience, so it's sort of not very beginner friendly, this whole system. And for this first campaign, I think all they've done is make it relatively easy, so that even if you don't really know what you're doing, as was the case with me, you can kind of get by. Now, another thing to mention, which already has passed us by, is that the method of getting new ships is another counterintuitive and fairly arbitrary, random method, where you get ships by capturing flagships that are just floating in space sometimes, and those will have ships in them, and those are the ships that you get to use, basically, the stuff that's in them. You can't make ships. That's the massive difference between most games and this. And it's a strange difference because no reason is given. It's just a feature of the game. You can't make ships, you can't make units. All you can do is make defenses, so you can sort of lock a place down by spending resources on making turrets and the like. But what you can't do is just make an attack group and do something. So to some extent, this limits your strategy because you just have to work with what you're given, and if you're not given enough to do the thing that you were thinking of doing, there's nothing you can do about that in the short term. But on the other hand, it's very deliberate. It feeds into how the strategy works, because now the only way for me to get stronger is to attack the enemy. I can't do anything economically to become stronger, and there's very, very little economy in this game to be had. If I want to get ships, I have to go into enemy territory, and I have to capture that territory to be allowed to take any neutral ships that are floating in that space. And as mentioned before, capturing territory makes the AI pay more attention to you. So this is where the picking and choosing of what to capture starts to come into play. We only really want to capture places that are going to make us stronger more broadly. We don't want to capture places that are strategic if there's no other reason to be wasting the sort of AI attention budget by capturing that location. So a place might be a strong choke point or something, but if you don't get extra units by capturing that location, maybe you just want to not do that. This is the sort of big breakthrough consideration you have to make to understand any of the intended gameplay in the game. And I sort of got it at first, but what I was thinking essentially the whole time for the first few hours playing was that I really didn't like it, because it's such an unsatisfying feeling to leave enemy fleets in your back lines and stuff like that, and leave them having warp gates, the ability to just teleport onto your home planet and such. It's very inconvenient. It doesn't feel like you're playing well, although in the game you are playing well. So you have to sort of change your mindset to get into that sort of idea. And I do think it's difficult, and one thing that is worth mentioning is that a brief check of the achievement data shows that of the people who played this game, virtually nobody did even some of the most basic actions in the game. I'm trying to remember it off the top of my head, but it was something like 16% of people had the achievement for ever unlocking a unit, which is a very basic action that you'll need to do. And this is partially because the method of unlocking units is not obvious or intuitive in any way. And basically, nobody's ever completed a campaign in this game. It was something like 5%, and tons of the achievements had 0% on them, which is very rare to see. So I'm guessing this game turned people away hard, and I think it's just because it's unusual. But what I think I'm going to be trying to argue in this video is that it's actually good and better than other games that are like this, the dots on lines map game thing. And while the strategy element of it is kind of hard to get into, it's counterintuitive, it doesn't feel very fun at first at least, it is technically better than other games. It's sort of more strategic, and it will ultimately require more strategy to play than a normal strategy setup, even though the strategies you have to use will feel, to a strategy game veteran, very stupid and will always feel like you're doing the wrong thing. It reminds me, to make another reference to Valkyria Chronicles, of Valkyria Chronicles, another game where you're given objectives and achieving them is the only thing that matters, no matter how weak you are strategically while you do them and as they are completed. So if you complete the objective while you're 2 seconds away from completely losing everything, that's absolutely ideal and is rewarded highly in the game because you played things so fast and loose. And that kind of design philosophy is in this game as well. You want to be on the complete edge of losing the campaign at all times, basically. That means you're playing optimally because you did the fewest things, you built up the least strength, you spent the fewest resources. But as long as you actually do the objective at some point, you are declared victor and it all goes back in the box. No one has to care about how terrible the empire you created actually was. Although an unsatisfying element to that is prevalent in this game is that in order to play with the weakest faction possible, essentially, you are relying on exploiting the AI. You are relying on the fact the AI just hasn't bothered to kill you, as mentioned earlier. And it is sort of unsatisfying to be like, well, I won, but only because the AI wasn't trying very hard, essentially. The game has plenty of depth in terms of difficulty to go through, but still, it feels like because you can't set up a strong defensive position in most scenarios anyway, it's sort of like, well, I know the only reason I won is because the game is designed not to force you to lose. So there's a sort of artificial nature to your ability to survive in a game where you're not supposed to earn your survival, effectively, if that makes any sense. Now, after all that ranting, let's take a look at a strategy. There was a place not so far from my home system that has an AI data center on it. You can see I've got 17 points remaining. Well, you might have seen that on that huge tooltip. I've got 17 points remaining until the AI levels up. I didn't know exactly what this did, but the tutorials were saying you should avoid it as much as possible. So, we're going to capture this data center, which promises to reduce the AIP by 60. It does mean, though, you have to capture the system first, which increases it as well. So, you need to essentially plan that you'll have enough leeway that after you've captured the system but before you get the data center, you haven't triggered the AI to level up. So we capture that thing, that gives us 60 extra points to work with, which is about enough to capture 2 or 3 new systems without the AI getting stronger. But of course we can chain these things together because there's another one of those nearby. I don't know how common this is, but this was a pretty nice opportunity, one that I'm effectively going to be wasting here, as we'll see. As a general rule, you have this map of dots. Only the dots with a grey thing next to them have anything special for you to do there, so there's an extra reason to capture it. Some of them, though, are things like unleash a horde of nanomachines to destroy the galaxy if you capture it, so not all of them are particularly useful, although I'm sure you can use that to your advantage. So I go on to also capture that other data center. I actually don't lose very much AIP, because I think I kind of wasted this. There's like a lower limit to what the AIP can actually be, so you can't bring it down to 0, which I suppose is a little bit counterintuitive. I mean, a nitpicky change would be, okay, why don't you make the lowest that it can be the number 0, because that's what the number 0 is for as a meta concept. So basically it can go down, but it won't go down below a certain amount. So we wasted that. And there's a caveat to capturing these data centers, which is that if you lose them again, you gain 90 AIP, and there's an example of it happening. Simply because I didn't expect the AI to counterattack. All the other systems I took, the AI didn't counterattack, so after having done a few, I was like, okay, I'll just leave immediately after capturing it. No, they counterattacked immediately this time. And there is actually a reason behind that I could have noticed earlier. I suppose I'll talk about that in a bit. Essentially, we have to recapture this system now, but we've already done the bad thing. Now the AI is more aware than it would have been. We've got things off to a bad start, essentially. What I was trying to do is go to that system one jump to the north to investigate something else, and I've got half my fleet still there. This is what they were doing instead of bothering to defend our territory. What I wanted to do is a hack. The green number at the top is a hacking currency, basically just a thing that you can spend to get stuff, and virtually every system has something you can hack to do something by spending this territory. But certain special ones have labs in them, and this is the way you get units, the counterintuitive way I mentioned earlier, because it kind of feels like if you're going to hack a lab and it gives you a list of ships to hack, it feels like you're getting the design, you're unlocking the unit as I described it incorrectly earlier. Well, that's not how it works. When you hack 70 ships out of a lab, you get 70 ships. This is how you recruit units effectively. But I completely didn't notice because I assumed that when you're hacking a lab for a ship, it was giving you the ability to make it somewhere. Or maybe you'd capture a flagship one day that would be able to produce that ship, and now you've unlocked it so something good would happen in the future. And nothing good was happening in the present, essentially. So because of that, I didn't cotton on that I could get stronger by hacking these labs, and effectively didn't do it for most of the first campaign. And, well, they just need to change the wording, really. The idea that you're hacking a real physical amount of things into existence is very confusing, essentially. It might have been easier if it was just like a warehouse and you hacked them to get them out. Then it would be clear that you're getting something from doing this. It is recruiting a unit. And we'll see there's something else later that sort of feeds into this as well. A brief look there on the left at the tech menu. A sort of confusing menu just because a lot of them, as mentioned, aren't going to do anything because they upgrade weapon types and your various ships have various weapon types. It's not especially easy to find them out. In fact, I don't really know what any of them are basically, but the tooltips will kind of say if you get this tech, here's the advantage to getting it. So you can blindly just get the ones that say they're going to do something, and that's going to have somewhat of a positive effect. But I suppose if you knew what they were going to do and really planned ahead, you could work out what units are available near you by looking at the labs, and then get upgrades that will be good for the ships you'll eventually get by hacking those labs or finding transport flagships, that sort of thing. Well, that was all far beyond me for the moment. Another thing to mention is that there are 3 kinds of command station you can put at a location. So effectively, your territory can either be military, logistic, or economic, and logistic just means in between military and economic. So the economic one gives you more number, but the military one gives you more defensive slots. There is a pop cap, a local pop cap on how many turrets you can make in a system, and a global pop cap, which is the yellow thing at the top. So by putting military stations down, you're more likely to hold a location. I actually have one of the economic stations holding one of my frontline positions. Because I wanted the number, I don't need the number in this case, so that was just a nice bad idea, but I thought, well, I'll cheekily try and get away with having the number station on the front line, and maybe the AI won't attack it. I did various experiments like that, essentially in this first campaign, trying to work out to what extent does the AI play the game then, if they're supposed to not notice us if we just keep our head down. Well, it plays it a little bit, and if it notices your frontline positions don't really have any defenses, they might try to take them, or just take them by accident while moving units around. Not that it would especially matter if I was to lose a location like that actually. The game's pretty generous when it comes to losing and regaining territory. For example, if you retake somewhere you've lost, the AI's progress score doesn't go up again. So once you've invested into owning a place, you can let the enemy retake it and then take it back, and that's okay, essentially. And the game's very automated as well in terms of buildings. So if you get a system wiped out, you go back in and clear the enemy out. The buildings will just rebuild themselves. You don't have to click very much, and I appreciated that to an extreme degree. I love how much what economy there is almost completely automated. It basically just does all of the optimal things for you, which in another lesser strategy game, it probably would have made you just do the optimal thing every time, and it would be really annoying. I think Sins of a Solar Empire was the last game I played that had that sort of annoying go into a system and gradually build up the economy yourself exactly the same every time mechanics where you had to do it 70 times during the campaign. But we're not ranting about that today. We'll see if they fix it in Sins of a Solar Empire 2, which I heard is being made. There was an example there of one of our new frontline systems being built, and here we are after having lost that economy frontline place on the other side of our empire. We jump on in, and those green lines are basically stuff being rebuilt automatically, so it's putting all of our turrets and shields and stuff back. And here, we have the opportunity to hack some turrets, and here's where the intuitiveness takes another dive, because this does work more like I thought it did with the ship hacking. When you hack a turret, you don't physically get the turrets, you get the design for the turrets in the way I presumed the ship system would work as well. So essentially, it lets your stations build that turret that you're unlocking, or if you've already unlocked it, it lets you build more of them, so it increases the local pop cap for them. That makes more sense. So if the game had a way to build ships, and then the existing hack stuff out of lab stuff to get ship designs was as it is now, I think that would all be fine, and I would have understood it at first what was going on. But as it stands, I did not understand it, and that's all I'm really claiming here. I didn't understand it, and I think it doesn't need to be like this. There's no advantage to wording it as being that you're hacking a design, but then what you actually get is the physical ships in a certain amount. And that was the thing I mentioned that virtually no one has even done in this game, to hack a lab to get ships. So I now count myself among one of the few people in the world who worked out how to build units in this game, but I really think it could have been a lot easier with just some really simple changes and been a lot more obvious how to do that, and that it was important to do it as well. Well, I'm just salty because I missed out on having a bunch of units early in the game because there are labs all over the place near me that I'm not hacking. A look here at some of the space combat, where you can see what it is. It's a blob shooting blobs at other blobs, which to some degree I really like, because the way it's simple allows the scale to be much larger than your average space strategy game. We have over 1,000 ships here in this early game fleet, so it's none of the very small scale combat you'll see in something like Stellaris, because it's more pretty, I guess. They can't afford to make it big. Here, basically it's just some shapes shooting at each other, but what it lacks is any sort of control, or I guess any really gameplay related to the combat itself. You do just throw your number against their number. Your ships are all theoretically good and bad at doing different things, and there could be some advantage to setting up a kind of formation or positioning them in certain ways, but that's just simply not part of the game, which is a tiny bit dissonant, really. I feel like they should go one of two directions. Either just have your ships be completely abstracted with no particular roles and not feel like you're missing out by not microing 1,000 ships at a time by constantly pausing the game or something. Or it should be the other way around and let you have formations and set them up to attack in certain ways, and perhaps have the combat take place at a much longer range than it does now. Another thing I didn't expect is this penalty I'm getting at the top left, the deep strike thing. Essentially, if you go too far away from your territory, the game will constantly spawn units to harass you until you go back, which I completely didn't expect, because this seems like exactly the sort of game where that wouldn't be the case. It wants you to go away from your territory and just be a nomad to some extent, doing your own thing behind enemy lines. So that is a shame, really. That sort of knocked out what was about to be my strategy. So I went home. You saw it there complaining about there was a moderate threat from the AI. That's because while I was wandering around the enemy territory trying to get back home again, I aggroed tons of enemies, which sort of wakes them up. And all of the enemies that you don't kill when you go into a system will go and coalesce somewhere to join a fleet that will show up later to harass you at some other time. So that's why the game was getting mad at me. Basically, I'm technically playing very poorly, but I bring this up only because I thought that was going to be a good idea, and I thought it was going to be fun, actually. So we've sort of been beaten back to where we were before. I found a good planet to take that has something for us to capture, so we'll settle in there. But then something else interesting happens. We've got this Instigator thing appearing at the top left. Basically, now and again, the AI will randomly make a building somewhere on the map, and if you don't kill that building, it constantly buffs the AI. So the AI is going to get 20% more budget to its Warden fleet, whatever that might be. I think that just means fleets that are defending territories. It's going to get 20% extra stuff in them every 5 minutes. So that's going to compound, basically, as you can imagine. If I don't go and take that thing out, the game's going to get, theoretically, infinitely harder quite quickly. So we need to go over there and take them out. We pop up in their territory. It's also a good territory to capture as well, because where they built the base has something else for me to capture, so we might as well take this place. Now, as we go into attack, you see these messages in the top right saying that some of my stuff has been crippled. This is another interesting feature. Essentially, your large ships, your flagships, are invincible. If they lose all of their health, it just says they are crippled. They can even still move while crippled, you just have to repair them, and if you were looking very closely, you might have seen I did repair it just in like 2 seconds and now it's back. At first I was like, that's a bit simple and a bit basic for what is trying to be a deeper strategy game. But then I thought, well, in realistic gameplay, that's actually really useful, because one thing I complain about often in strategy games is how much downtime there is if you lose units. Well, this game gets around that by essentially making it really hard to lose units, and it's really easy to get them back. So your flagship is invincible, and even if everything deployed out of the flagship dies, it just respawns. So you really have a nearly unlimited supply of ships. You're only limited in how quickly you can constantly be respawning them. So essentially, it's all action-packed, and while that is sort of simple, as I said, I also kind of like it because there's always something to do, and the AI, I presume, constantly respawns their ships as well. Well, I'm not quite sure about that yet, but from my first experience, I'm like, well, I appreciate that it's easier than it could have been in that way. Now we're facing a problem with the pop cap after taking that system. The yellow number towards the top left, your energy, is essentially your pop cap, your global supply limit. And we have reached it. So what I need to do is delete defenses somewhere effectively to free up more pop cap, but I didn't really know where to do that. The issue I have is that with my random territories all over the place, I kind of need them all to be defended, because I didn't know where the enemy was going to attack. You can heavily influence where the enemy will attack to get around this problem, which I just didn't really work out at first. If you go around taking out enemy warp gates all around your territory, but leave one easy route for them to get in, that will probably be where they try to attack. So that's how I think you're supposed to get around this pop cap issue. You just focus down 1 or 2 locations with all of your defensive units. Well, we're not doing that here. We have an extremely exposed empire with like 5 borders, and that's only counting the external ones. There are like 12 internal borders where we have skipped territories the enemy can still warp into and then come to attack us from the inside. That's the sort of unsatisfying thing I was talking about, but I could have made things better, and we'll see some of that in the next campaign I'll show. So now we've reached Mark II, because I captured another system somewhere up in the top left. This was a little thing that confused me that I'll just rant about, just in case anybody can relate to this. When the game's talking about marks, and like ships have a mark, and your stations have a mark as well, for quite a long time, until fairly late in my first campaign, I didn't really know what it meant by the word mark, and it's much more simple than I thought. I effectively confused myself by presuming it was talking about some mechanic that was unique to this game. I basically tripped over my own meta considerations, thinking they've used the word mark instead of something like level or tier, because to increase your mark isn't necessarily a good thing, so they've used a word with a negative connotation in order to indicate that there's not necessarily a direct advantage to increasing your mark. And I say negative connotation because I was looking at the word mark and thinking, oh, mark as in like a target, like I'm increasing the aggro-ness of my fleet by increasing its mark. That's what I thought I was doing. But no, it means mark in the like engineering sense, I suppose, like the something something Mark II is a new version of something. So basically what's going on is that everything in the game is between levels 1 and 7, but replace the word level with mark, and that's all that's happening. But essentially, for my first campaign, I was not only struggling to get units because I didn't know how to do it, as mentioned earlier, but was slightly hesitant to do it because I thought there might be some downside that I don't understand, and that was connected directly just to the use of the word mark, and me not understanding why they've used that word. So another case where, like the hack thing, it's actually doing something really simple and normal and would be perfectly fine to understand, but by not completely wording it in the most generic way possible, I assumed they were doing something more clever, and as a result didn't understand the actually very simple mechanic. Now, while I was ranting, we saw the consequences there of the AI mark going up. They've got more number, and their numbers became larger than my numbers, and I, for a while, lost most of my territory, and then gradually worked on getting it back. And as mentioned, getting your territory back is kind of easy, which is nice. You just have to show up and it rebuilds everything. However, what tends to happen is if you go to counter an enemy's incursion into your territory, the enemy will just leave. and then they'll just come back the second you leave as well. So you kind of have to attack the enemy with a force that's similar in strength to them so they don't just leave, or use like tractor beam ships or something if you can get them. You don't necessarily have the choice about whether to do that, which is one of those things that I'm a bit iffy on in terms of the game design. Well, anyway, after a while, we've got basically most of our territory dead. I have no pop cap, I can't build anything, but I was gambling on being able to head over to this super terminal I'd spotted on the map far from my territory, and we have just arrived. So what I'm trying to do here is hang on to get to the super terminal, which you can hack to massively reduce the AI progress score. And then I thought, with having loads of AI progress in hand, I would just capture my core region entirely and start blocking off bits of territory, go for things that aren't very good uses of AIP budget in order to make things less hectic. It turns out though, that when you hack the super terminal, the AI will spawn units on top of you to try and stop you from hacking it. And while at first this seemed manageable, it essentially spawns more and more. It's going up exponentially while I'm not really looking at it and not expecting it to be going up exponentially too. That's the most important thing. So, while our fleet is engaged in battle and seems to be winning, that's not going to be the case for long. Soon they've spawned so much stuff that we're being overwhelmed here. This is one of these cases where I'm confused at my own opinion on this game design effectively, because normally I would say having the ability for your opponent to spawn things is like a huge no-no. It's reminiscent of things like garrisons in Total War games, where it's a sort of balance breaking thing that only is put in because the balance was even more broken before. It's a band-aid. You're just trying to stop the player from doing something by making the AI cheat against you. Well, in this case, the cheating here is very strong, but it's so deliberate that it sort of feels okay. It's like, alright, the enemy just spawned a massive army because I tried to do something. I guess that's my fault for trying to do something. I don't feel like saying, well, why can the AI spawn massive armies? Like, that's a strategy breaking thing in a strategy game. You should be able to know where the AI's troops are. They shouldn't just appear. Well, in this game, well, they'll just appear. The AI has unlimited resources, I suppose. They can just make armies whenever they want, but often they don't want to. Well, anyway, I came away, if not too annoyed by the freely spawning enemy units, a little frustrated that I suppose the game isn't really going anywhere, because now I'm back on the defensive. I still don't have most of my territory. I'm going to have to wait a while to make my armies again, which thankfully is a relatively easy thing to do because the making of the armies is so automated. But yes, I was hoping that push might lead somewhere. I'm still in this constant state of having to defend my terrible looking empire and not being too happy about it, so we're still at odds here with the whole AI progress mechanic and the idea of being punished for setting up a secure empire, or at least having limitations to how secure you can make your little bit of territory. It's just not secure enough, even right here at the beginning of the first campaign, effectively. So what I need to be doing is going out and taking out warp gates. I think in retrospect, you can spend some AI progress to take out the warp gates near you, which will reduce the extent to which the enemy attacks you a bit. I've done it a little bit, but because it costs this resource to do it that you can't get back easily, I sort of wanted to be as vulnerable as possible, as mentioned earlier, while still not dying. But we are still dying, so obviously that has not been achieved here. So essentially I spent a while going around inside my own territory clearing stuff up. Eventually, I got my fleet together and got back to where I was when I lost the fleet, back over where that super terminal was, which is only about 2 or 3 jumps now from the enemy's home planet, and that, by the way, is where I'm actually trying to go in the broadest possible sense. However, this expedition over there is recalled because of another freely spawning thing. The AI spawned a thing somewhere, and if you don't kill it, it's going to spawn more things. So basically, we have to cancel the plan and go for that. This is completely random as far as I can tell. I think I looked in the wiki and it said something like every hour or so, the AI will just spawn some stuff that you have to attend to. And I sort of think, well, that's awful on the face of it. Surely that shouldn't be in the game. But again, when actually playing, I thought it was sort of fun, because I was like, ooh, a challenge, now I have to go deep into enemy territory and do something. I sort of feel like maybe I'd prefer if the game leaned more into this idea of not actually having territory and being more nomadic almost, and going around deep in enemy territory, getting up to shenanigans. But as mentioned earlier, there are punishments for doing that, and you have to go back to your own territory quite a lot, because you do need an economy. You can't take your economy with you. Well, anyway, we dealt with that problem. I then still couldn't attend to progressing the game because I had to go back to my territory and deal with the fact it was under heavy attack. Here's what was attacking me. I had noticed something went into my territory, took out a bunch of stuff, and then left. So I pursued them, thinking I'm going to take them out and stop them just coming back again, because I knew they would. And here they are, or at least here is part of that force. The AI can have its units go cloaked, and you have certain units on your side that can see them, which you may or may not happen to have in your army. That's going to be pretty much random chance. Whatever the case is, there ends up being a massive amount of enemy fleet behind me on the route I just took to get here, so maybe they're invisible or maybe I just wasn't paying attention. There's also this other thing happening, this counterattack mechanic, where in the system I'm in, I need to take out all of the guard posts, or some more stuff is going to spawn. Here's the fleet that walked past me, the one that's now behind me, 2 jumps back on this arm of the map, and they're taking out my back lines. That's going to harm my economy even more. We are once again pop-capped. Basically, we've got firefighting going on, and while it's not obvious because I'm cutting, and because the timer in the bottom left doesn't advance while the game is paused, I spent about an hour knowing what I was supposed to be doing, but not doing it at all, because of the constant crises that were happening all over the place. And this was a bit demoralizing, because this is the first campaign. The AI is on what I think in retrospect is the lowest possible difficulty. It's called difficulty 4, because once again the game refuses to use numbers like 0 or 1 to represent the lowest amount of something for unknown reasons. I think the difficulty goes between 4 and 10. So it's hitting me as lightly as it can, I suppose, but it's still hitting me too hard and I keep losing my territory all the time, and it's prolonging the game. The good news is that I finally realized I was supposed to be hacking these research stations all the time. Essentially, the mental breakthrough that I wasn't unlocking a tech by doing this, but actually getting units occurred. So now I realize, oh, that's how I get units. Okay, we're going to start getting some units. This isn't going to make a massive difference because there's only a few ship sets you can get by doing this. But essentially, some of our numbers will go up, and while our defenses will still be in tatters, our offensive capabilities will improve. And once your number is higher than any number around you, you can do any offensive if you have time to do it. Here I am, simultaneously fighting one battle on the west side of our empire, where I've split off part of the fleet to defend against the never-ending respawning enemy waves, just to keep my economy intact, to support the actions of the main fleet. The main fleet is on the other side of the galaxy right now, and it has some combat support ships in it that will rebuild the fleet as it goes. So we're moving closer towards this nomadic experience that I was sort of looking for, where our main fleet operates independently. It doesn't need a base because it can build its own ships, as long as we keep enough territory somewhere to keep the economy going. So I was enacting now my big plan to push towards winning the campaign. First, I'm capturing the territory that's right next to the enemy homeworld, because by putting factories here, factories can build units in adjacent regions. So if I send my big fleet to go fight over the enemy homeworld, I'll be constantly respawning ships. About 10 minutes later, after going around and doing some more hacking and clearing up of messes, here we are at the enemy homeworld. There's a whole bunch of stuff here, of course, but our number is a bit bigger than the number defending it, so at last I'm confident to just go for this. There are some complications though. We learned that by taking out the guard posts here, it increases the AI progress. I'm now on the absolute threshold of the enemy leveling up here and getting more number. If I kill one more thing, I actually won't be able to win this battle, so what I need to do is clear out all of the regular units and then take out the guard posts here. Fortunately, that's what I did anyway, because it was just happening like that, so we don't need to worry about that strategy, but in theory that could have gone much worse. Now we go around and take out the guard posts. What I'm actually supposed to be doing here is fighting that star shape towards the middle. That's the AI. It physically exists and you can kill it, or can you? There was a thing popping up there saying that it's invulnerable to all of my units. Well, the gimmick here is that you have to take out every quote-unquote dire guard post in the galaxy before you can take out the AI Overlord. Fortunately, they're all sort of near the AI. I was worried for a second I'd have to crusade all over the entire map to sort this out. Well no, they're sort of in the systems around the enemy's homeworld, so that's fine. we have the number to kill all of those systems. The enemy's number can potentially go up, as mentioned, because of me doing this, but because I've leveled it up just now, we've now got enough leeway to kill a bunch more of the stations without the enemy leveling up again. And because we still have enough number, we're essentially guaranteed to do this as long as we're not severely distracted from doing it, or as long as we don't lose all of our territory or something. Well, I suppose we can lose most of it, although that said, we are pop-capped right now, and I think as your fleet gets destroyed, it stops rebuilding if you're pop-capped. Not quite sure about that, but maybe our number isn't regenerating out here right now like I wanted it to be. There you can see in the top right, it's spawning some more stuff against us now. I think that's because we've leveled up the AI. It just gets more freely spawned stuff, which in this instance I didn't really worry about because we're so close to the end of the game, but that is sort of bad in principle, and we'll see it in practice in the next campaign. So we go and take out all of the things. This allows the AI to be attacked. However, there is a second phase to the AI Overlord. It becomes invincible in a way. You can see this tooltip's kind of complicated here, but essentially after reading through it a billion times, I worked out what's happening here. It's invincible as long as it's near its homeworld or a bastion world, which are basically the worlds near the homeworld. So you just have to wait and hope it goes somewhere else. About 5 minutes later, it happens to have gone somewhere else, and now we can kill it. So I'm not really sure what's up with this. The AI is able to hold off on losing indefinitely by being invincible, and you just have to rely on the fact it might happen to go outside of the invincibility area for some reason, and then you can kill it. So that kind of sucks. That's a real, you just have to let the AI make a poor decision and try to exploit it in some way, but there's no reason for it to ever do it. So it's a very arbitrary way to end the campaign there. Not a fan of that. Well, a thing pops up saying that we won, and that's the end of that really, although the campaign continues on anyway. I think the only difference now is that you can't level up the AI because it's dead. So you can conquer the galaxy if you like, although nothing will happen and there's no point in doing that. One thing I did expect to see and was disappointed not to see was some sort of statistics screen where it told you how many gajillions of tons of ships you lost or something during the campaign and how big the scale of the campaign was in general. Well, that would have been the end of the video really, but I decided to go on and play a second campaign, so we're going to extend this video a fair bit to talk about some other stuff in this other campaign now as well. So this is the second scenario where basically it's the same, but you have to fight two AIs, and we'll see what exactly that means as we go along. I realized you can change what the map looks like in advance. So I changed it to one that had a bunch of circles connected to each other, something that looked vaguely interesting to play with there. Lots of choke points and lots of opportunities to have satisfying conquest areas where you would secure a circle if this was another game and that was an option. Well, here I am looking at the tech tree right away this time, because now I have some idea of what techs are actually useful in the long run, because even if a tech looks really good right off the bat, it might not be very useful for later use. This kind of sucks because it's RNG based, essentially what ships you're going to get. What techs are useful is random at the start of the game. So you need to just kind of guess correctly what sort of fleet you're going to be speccing into. And I think in practice, most fleets rely on the same couple of techs, and other techs are very rarely used. So, well, it's just all too complicated for what it is, I think. You might as well simplify that down and try to remove the random element as much as possible. At least I knew somewhat what I was doing. This map shape gives us opportunities to do choke points, which is quite nice, because there are so many systems that only have one way in and out in the enemy's direction. We can lock them down, and as long as there's another reason to lock it down, like this one having a ship to capture there, they'll make for somewhat satisfying and efficient choke points, although I wasn't actually setting up a choke point there because I used the economy station, so it's going to be still pretty vulnerable to attack. Whatever. So let's talk about this whole two AIs thing. What I thought was going on here at first with the two AIs is that once you defeated one AI, the second one would be harder, because in that first campaign, we got enough AI mark points to level up the AI twice during the final section, where I was just taking out those stations that provide the AI Overlord its invincibility and fighting the AI Overlord itself. That was enough to give them 2 level ups. So I thought, that's the gimmick, that's why this is slightly harder, because the second AI is going to be leveled up, it will have bigger numbers or something, so there'll be a difficulty spike at the end. Well, that is going to be happening. However, there are many other reasons why fighting 2 AIs is not only slightly harder than fighting 1, it's at least twice as hard. And essentially it comes down to, well, what's happening right here. The way the AI makes units is it spawns them. They just appear on timers or in reaction to events. And if there are 2 AIs, there are 2 different things that can cause units to randomly appear. So, over the course of a campaign, you're going to face at least double the amount of stuff just appearing and attacking you. But there's still nothing you can do about that, because even though the AI are sharing the map, there's no economy, there's no way to raid and damage the enemy's production capacity, so it's just straight up being doubled, because it's all just teleporting out of nowhere. And I'm not a huge fan of this. I didn't really realize to what extent that was going to matter until later on, as we'll see. We're going to be facing a lot of randomly spawning things, and it does hamper the game because you have to deal with them instead of doing whatever you were thinking of doing, and because they happen so randomly, just out of the blue. It's sort of disappointing every time. It's like, oh, it's spawning a wave against me. Now I have to waste a few minutes dealing with that and not doing whatever I was in the middle of doing, so it can very much interrupt the flow. In a similar way to like a random battle in a Total War game can come up and just interfere with your train of thought, and then you're distracted for so long that it sort of breaks the flow, breaks the pace of the game. Well, here in this campaign, I started to feel a similar frustration to that, as I always knew what I needed to do or what I wanted to do, but actually doing it was another matter entirely, not because of how difficult it was to do, but because of how many other things I keep having to do instead that are just infinitely regenerating AI cheats. My theory, based on some of the text in tooltips and the like, is that the intended way to play is that you shouldn't use your main ships to defend against these spawning waves. You need to set up your empire so that it's sort of self-sufficient in that regard. By doing things like this here, using just the turrets around stations to take out invasion waves, we've got tractor beams here that stop them from moving away from us basically, so they're forced to stay in the system and get shot by these turrets, which will gradually kill them. So you're supposed to do that such that the invasion spawns aren't too much of a problem and you can ignore them. I think that's the plan. And at least to begin with, we do have something like that going on. Primarily because the AI mark is low, so the freely spawning units aren't that good, and just some turrets is often enough to take them down. Although even with that distraction dealt with, we do still have to go out and kill the things that spawn, which continually make the enemy stronger if you don't kill them, so here's a case where I need to go back and not make an offensive, to go to the middle of the map and take something out. Here, a Boracum, another key system, is one where I've spammed turrets all over the place and it occasionally gets attacked. As mentioned before, you can take out enemy warp gates to sort of influence what places are likely to be attacked. This does cost AI progress though, so you ideally want to not do this, although I think in practice it's impossible to actually defend your territory if you let the enemy keep all of their warp gates, so increasingly I was taking them out as I was going along. Well anyway, there's stuff going on here. I've got a fleet to go and take out that Instigator, but along the way a counterattack is spawning, and boom, here comes another invasion spawn. The little red thing around that Aquileia invasion spawn timer at the top left basically means you're going to lose the fight in 2 minutes. So we have to do something there, either spam some turrets and hope they build in time or send ships to deal with the place. And by the way, if you don't defend an area against these invasion spawns, what I sort of thought would happen is the enemy would recapture it and that would be the end of that. But no, if the station in a location is dead and a force has spawned against it, it will just attack somewhere else, and we'll see that becomes a problem later on. I've actually almost completed what I was trying to do in the early game. I've gone to the very bottom of the map and discovered the location of one of the 2 AIs. I even actually had there enough number to start taking that AI down, but critically, and I think this is the big turning point of the campaign, I didn't go for it. I actually sent my troops away because I didn't think I would be strong enough. This was entirely because in the campaign we just saw earlier, the amount of AI progress that is spent by going after one of the AIs is going to be sufficient to level up the AI, and I was worried that I would both not have the number to get through all of one of the AI's core territories, but also that the increasing strength of the attacks coming elsewhere would mean I would lose everything while I'm away, and you do need to at least try and keep your home system alive. So because of that, I didn't actually go after the first AI I discovered. Instead, I decided to go around the galaxy looking for more ships some more, to get some more number and do more hacks and stuff. We've got a cool ship here, the Botnet Golem, that turns the enemy units into zombie units, these black with the yellow outline things. They will just wander around randomly shooting at enemies, and I think it doesn't aggro them, so it doesn't add to the AI threat, that yellow number next to the AI progress thing at the top, which is a rough measure of how aggroed the enemy is against you, and as it goes up, more and more stuff will come to attack you. Well, anyway, something good was happening over there. We're still using our turrets to defend here at Alexandria, one of my key defensive locations, but the enemy is starting to get a bit stronger at this stage. Turrets are also a little bit difficult to use, because while it says we have enough number to fight this fleet, your turrets aren't necessarily all in range because they're stationary. So the actual number versus number fight is possibly different to what it says. The issue we're having though is that the system next door is about to go down to this random attack. I think this is one of the AI threat style attacks coming in, although I'm not quite sure. Cases where the enemy just has some aggroed units that will now and again decide to move into your territory just to see what's there, and if it's weak they'll try to take it down. And indeed we lose the station, and as it says in the top right, if you lose a station, it spawns another fleet somewhere. I think it said it's spawning an EXO, which isn't obvious what that means, of course, but I think when the game says EXO, it means it's spawning an extra galactic fleet. That's the EXO part. So essentially it's saying some free units are appearing for the enemy somewhere and they'll come after you. I have once again set up down at the bottom, ready to go after the AI according to my plan, but there's another same critical moment as before really, where I decide to call off the attack and go back for one reason or another, both to get stronger and to shore up defensive issues here and there. The big problem, of course, is something I didn't really think about while playing. While I was sort of instinctively trying to rush down one of the AIs, that would have been a really good idea, and my reluctance to go through with it no matter the cost, especially in AI progress, was a big mistake, because of the thing I mentioned earlier that I wasn't really thinking about. The AI is doubly spawning units against me because there are two AIs, so if I can take out one, even if it massively increases the strength of the other, it's going to have halved production capacity for all intents and purposes, so that massive increase in strength translates into less number coming at you still. So I think that would have been the optimal strategy. That's what you're supposed to do. Try to rush down one of the AIs while the AI mark is low, so they're not too strong. Doing so will increase the AI mark and make the rest of the fights harder in principle, but there'll be far fewer fights and it will be more manageable effectively. Instead, we have this situation where, as you can see in the top left, they're attacking us in multiple locations with their freely spawning fleets. That Mulai thing is another one that's trying to spawn elsewhere. I need to go and take out some guard posts to stop that from happening. Essentially, as alluded to earlier, there's stuff happening all over the place, and it sufficiently distracted me from making the attack. Even though I was always on the verge of making that attack, I never quite got to it. So what I'm doing here is I've just cut ages into the future of the campaign, because here we are much later where things are basically the same as they were now. We control some of the middle, and we have routes going towards the edges where the AI are. But for the most part, we're just defending. I've split my stuff into two main blocks, a slow defensive block that just sort of deals with the ongoing situations, and an offensive block that was set up ready to go for the northern AI instead of the southern. That was because the route to the northern AI had a bunch of the AI data centers on it, so I could theoretically go that way while reducing AI progress. That was the plan. But again, I think that was a mistake. I think just rushing down the southern AI would have been the best thing to do. Now we have some more issues to deal with. There's another Instigator base spawning off in the enemy's territory, and if you look at the attack on Pella coming in 2 seconds, the number that the enemy now has to throw at us is getting quite large. That's because I had to take some territories in the north to claim more ships. But that also makes the AI stronger, so we've got this loop really where the things I want to do to get stronger so that I can overcome the AI are also making the AI stronger, so it's making me less confident that I can overcome the AI, and we get stuck in a loop there of trying to win an arms race against the AI where not participating might be the best way to advance there. And effectively at this stage, we are bogged down because we keep losing systems and have to go around to deal with that all the time. And while I think I still am strong enough to take out at least one of the AIs, I was hesitant enough that I didn't go for it, / I was constantly using my offensive fleet to deal with very large enemy offensive fleets in my territory, or in this case going after the Instigator base perhaps. One issue that I mentioned earlier is that if the enemy spawn a big wave and it comes in and just takes out a weak system that you've just captured or something, not only does the enemy spawn more ships, but the original wave goes on to attack other systems, and usually, once they've broken through one system, everything behind it's going to be weaker because of how the economy works. You're sort of incentivized to have a few strong points and everything else in the middle be weak because you get more economy that way. And that's just another impetus to keep using my attack fleets to do defensive stuff, which, as mentioned, I'm sure you're not supposed to do. I'm sure the developer watching me play would be like, well, you're complaining about it, but you're playing it wrong. I feel like I know that I'm playing it wrong, although at the time I didn't feel like I had any other options. I think one thing I should do is spend more of my pop cap. We're totally unpop capped, because I kept a massive amount of floating pop cap thinking at any moment I'm going to actually break through, move forwards, and start capturing territory, building more turrets on the front line, and getting more ships, and I need to keep my pop cap for that. But it might have been better to just spend it now making tons of turrets to make the defenses less odious, and then delete the turrets later, which you can do, to get the pop cap back. Well, whatever the case, there's fighting all over the place, but most of the time, or all of the time really, I'm just fighting things that will come back every few minutes. I think it's every 5 minutes each AI can spawn one of its fleets, and because the AI mark is high enough that their fleets are roughly comparable in strength to mine, I have to go to wherever it's spawning to stop them, or hope it spawns in one of the 2 places I think, where I'd set up enough defenses to reasonably stop an enemy fleet, most of the time anyway. I've sort of worked out the AI gate system such that it will usually attack those places. But the issue is that when I advance to try and capture a new ship or something, that opens up more gates, and then I forget to go into neighboring systems and take them out. Plus, going into those systems to take them out would also increase the AI progress, so I kind of want to see if I can get away without doing it when that happens as well. Well, you know, there are many decisions to make. I'm fairly sure I've been making them wrong, and that's part of the reason I'm having trouble. But I suppose the ultimate complaint here, to cap off this constant complaining section we've got in the video, is that what we might have got is a soft failure state. The fact that you can't take many gameplay actions because you're just reacting to what the AI does. The AI has all of the initiative and momentum against you because it can do things for free with its unlimited economy. You get into a state where you can't win for all intents and purposes because the AI can only become stronger. Any action you do will only make the AI stronger. So if you're not really stronger than it, if you're not steamrolling it, then you're in trouble because you will only get slower and slower. Your momentum will only go down as the game progresses. Because even though you can capture ships and hack ships out of research labs, not only is there a finite amount of those, there's a finite amount of research you can do, so you can't upgrade your ships past a certain point. And you'll reach a point, which is effectively now in the campaign, when your number isn't going to be able to go up anymore. However, the AI's number can still go up, so it just becomes a balancing act. How much is the AI number going to go up? In the early game, if you mark up the AI, it gets like, say, 20 extra number in a fleet, which doesn't matter all that much. But as it turns out, in retrospect, it does go up pretty geometrically, exponentially if you like. So we now effectively can't win because in order to attack one of the AIs, it would mark up and increase its own strength by so much that even if I controlled every possible ship on the map, it wouldn't be enough number to do it. And while playing, I never imagined such a thing as that would be a balancing possibility. Well, it's more than a possibility. It is now, I think, at this stage in the campaign, an inevitability. And that's why I call it a soft failure state here. We are doomed because I didn't take out the first AI earlier, I think, anyway. Well, I'm alluding to what's going to happen in a bit. We might as well take a look at that. What we've been seeing here is my attempt to do that super terminal hack thing I did in the first campaign, this time paying attention so it doesn't suddenly spike up and kill my fleet. Interestingly, because we had the botnet golem thing that's turning the enemies into zombies, we had all the zombies that were spawning earlier in this fight waiting around to help us later in the fight. So we get a whole bunch of AI progress wiped out with this hack, although I then essentially spent everything I gained by hacking nearby research places and taking out warp gates and stuff, just trying to get stronger. And I sort of did this in the knowledge that I was going to also go and take this AI data center up top. These are the data centers I mentioned earlier on the way to the northern AI. So I'm giving myself some leeway to attack the northern AI while potentially not marking up the enemy, or at least not doing it twice. That's what I was more thinking about. So once again, we are ready to go in and try to take out an AI, but there was an instigator base spawning and some attacks coming in, so I had to go deal with that. And because I've taken new territory to get that AI progress down, that's more warp gates that are facing my territory, so we're going to be attacked in more different places. Need to build up defenses and use my fleet in the meantime to defend those places, especially in cases where there is an AI data center, because as mentioned, if you lose the data center, then the AI makes more progress than it lost earlier for some reason. And we lose the data center immediately. That's where I'm going with this. It gets attacked, and while my fleet was there, the data center sort of off to the side of the system, and a few enemy ships just went over there, escaping from the fight, and took it out instantly. What I actually thought would happen was that they had to take down the command center of the system rather than the data center itself to achieve that. I think that's what happened in the previous cases where I lost it. I think it might just be both is the answer to that. So we totally screwed up there. We've now got less AI leeway than I wanted, but because we're now on the verge of destruction effectively, I have to just go for it and see what happens. So I send my mustered up big fleet to go in and start attacking the northern AI's home territory. Meanwhile, my other fleet, fleet number 2, is off somewhere else trying to get to the Instigator and shut it down. That's why I have a deep strike penalty at the moment. So we go around and take out all of the dire guard posts, but every time you do that, you're going to get some AI progress. I'm not sure how much you actually get overall, but it's at least like 50 AI progress points you get to make the AI Overlord vulnerable, and then you get more for attacking the AI Overlord. So we've certainly marked up one time and got a decent way towards marking up a second time. And here was where I made another big mistake and learned something that I already mentioned earlier in this commentary. The idea that if you just let a system fall to an AI wave attack, that's not the end of it, and maybe I think it would be better if it was. So essentially, a large attack spawned in some random territory, Korea on the left there, that I didn't care about because I only took it to claim a ship from it, and now I was fine to let it go. But as it turns out, the AI fleets that go and take your systems don't stay there afterwards, which at this stage I was still assuming. They go on the warpath against anything else they can, and this one happens to rear attack another system with an AI data center in it, and the data center was physically at the back right next to the warp place. So with the AI coming in from that direction, they take it out immediately, giving us more AI progress. They're also strong enough to probably take the system by the looks of those numbers as well. So we're in more and more trouble. Potentially that's another recommendation then, to allow yourself to be able to lose territory strategically, to just scorched earth the place and abandon it to the AI, and you still are punished for doing this because you had to inflict AI progress on yourself to take it in the first place. But I would like it if the freely spawned waves at least despawned if you just let them do their thing. You give them something and they go away. That seems like an interesting strategic trade. Well, the situation we end up in after all this is that I've done the stuff to start making the AI Overlord vulnerable. However, the strength of the attacks coming in twice every 5 minutes is now so strong that I'm having to really commit everything essentially to the defense. There's also this at the top right. The AI also spawns fleets at later marks that attack you regardless of the warp gate destruction system. So that means you can't influence where they're going to attack. They just sort of build up around flagships and come at you in a similar way to how you're going at the AI. So with that, we're just in more trouble basically, because the idea of focusing down your defenses in single locations begins to go out the window the later in the game you get. And both AIs have multiple things like that they can spawn. There it says it's spawning a phoenix against us. Don't know what that means, but basically a bunch of numbers going to appear somewhere and move around. Here's what those things look like. I discovered one in the enemy's home territory, a hunter-seeker, so at least that one's not going to cause too much of an issue. The problem we are going to have though is that we're focused so entirely on the north end of the map that if anything spawns in the south, we're doomed. And let me assure you, stuff is spawning in the south. I'm just not showing it because I was literally not looking at it. I've closed my eyes, I'm just screaming to distract myself from the fact that our territory is completely wide open to attack. I'm trying to do the objective, basically hoping that this will somehow solve some problems. But the strength of the attacks coming in has just gone out of control. We've nearly taken out the first AI. We've got it to the point when it's mobile and we have to wait for it to happen to go somewhere when we can kill it again. But now, when the AI spawns an attack, it can have 1,000 fleet power, and even if I put everything I have, which is virtually everything on the map, together, we'll struggle to fight a fleet with 1,000 fleet power, and one of those is just going to appear on the map twice every 5 minutes. So this is where we are completely screwed. It's now like no longer a speculation about the soft failure state, it's a guaranteed soft failure state, but I think that might have actually occurred much earlier in retrospect. So not only are they spawning those 1,000 strength fleets, but there are other 1,000 strength fleets just wandering around in our territory. So I have to make some effort to go and find them, and even though I can't get 1,000 strength myself, try to bring them down, perhaps fighting them while they're moving or something so we don't face them all at once, because those mobile fleets are not only destroying our economy, we're more than pop-capped right now, they could, if they wanted to, go for our home territory and just defeat us. We only have 150 or so fleet strength at our home territory. So it's sort of a matter of time now. Will they do that? Will I find a way to kill them? And more importantly, is there any way to kill them in such a way that it doesn't take so long to kill them that they haven't already respawned somewhere else and we're not just stuck in an endless loop? Well, as I'm alluding to, I think we are stuck in a very big and hard to detect endless loop, in fact, just like life itself. And here's where the loop ends. Actually, a very small fleet of only 150 enemy strength just goes into our home system, and here's how long it lasts. Once it gets into range of our home thing that we have to defend, it dies pretty much instantly. I kind of expected it to be a strong thing at least, but no, it's terrible. Just a couple of ships are enough to take it out. And that was that. After a long struggle, we lost, but I think in effect we had lost a long time ago. And I remember feeling a bit shocked that the AI was even allowed to become as powerful as it did at the end. I thought maybe the final AI mark could be where we were now, where it's just apocalypse mode and you can't survive. I think we were just about on AI mark 6, so 5 and 6 is sort of the point when it becomes impossible to manage even if you've got about as strong as you can get. And 4 is the sort of final manageable part where you might plausibly be able to defend without committing your fleet to defenses, or committing too much of your fleet, I should say. So I think in retrospect, maybe I shouldn't have focused so much on getting stronger, because many of the ships you capture increase AI progress, and doing some of the hacks to get extra ships inside your ships can also increase AI progress sometimes anyway. And of course, to capture ships you have to take territory, which also increases AI progress. So was my desperation to become more powerful so that I could be confident about taking out an AI, knowing it would also become more powerful at the same time, was that too far? Should I have just gone in for it? Well, as mentioned earlier, I think I probably should have tried to scrappily take out one of the AIs somehow, back when it was at AI Mark 3 or something and my fleet only had 200 number attached to it. It probably would have been doable. Now I'm going to step in and cut myself off here. In the original recording, I've got 10 minutes of me ranting about my sort of review and thoughts on the game and trying to work out things I would have done differently had I been making the game. Well, maybe my thoughts now are different. This is Devin from the future, because I decided to actually play the game for a third time. So we're going to extend this thing on and now do a commentary on my third campaign, where basically the strategy I was just speculating upon is the strategy I'm going to try. A strategy where not only not taking territory is prioritized, but not really doing anything to increase the AI mark and deliberately remaining weak, not increasing the size of our fleet just because we have the opportunity to do so, essentially trying to keep it at the real bare minimum, and I think this is more in the spirit of the game. And at the end I'll still rant anyway later about what I think about this spirit of the game and such, but for now, the rants will be delayed. It's time to look at another campaign. Now, I was lying just now, because I realised there is something I need to rant about that I'm surprised I didn't rant about earlier. There's been so much to say. I didn't talk about something that happens constantly, and that is actually a key part of the game that somehow I haven't mentioned so far, and that is the way the AI threat works. We've touched upon this. Essentially, when you go into an enemy system, what's there will try to leave and add themselves to the AI threat fleet, and that number, the 8 at the top, is how much number the enemy is effectively playing against us right now. So the enemy has tons of number, but it's mostly doing nothing, but the aggroed amount is what that 8 represents. And what we saw me do here is go into a system and then swarm the wormhole to stop everything from leaving. And that's how you stop the number from going up. Whenever the enemy aggro, they'll try to go off to join a fleet, and you just try to take them out as soon as possible. And you do this in every single system you enter, and even every time you enter a system, because the enemy can build back while you're away, so you go back to somewhere you've been before, you have to do that again. And I dislike that severely. I'll talk about it a bit more in a sec, because let's talk about what's happening right now. I'm hacking to get some ships. Well, we know about that already. But what I didn't really appreciate is that your transport ships, I think, can have an infinite number of ships inside them, or at least I've never seen it say you can't have any more than you've got already. So basically, my previous idea of going around capturing all of the empty transport ships isn't really that useful, because actually you can just hack tons of ships into a very small number of transports, which gives you a similar amount of number strength, but costs way less AIP, because it's capturing the initial transports that really costs the AIP. So with this new development, which is essentially being discovered by accident during this campaign, we're going to have a lot of number with less enemy number appearing to punish it. The other thing I was doing was focusing on the techs and trying to really think about how we're going to do tech, because you have to get them in advance, essentially, to get the most out of them. So, for example, in this campaign I'm speccing into melee techs, so now when given the choice to hack various kinds of ship, I have to hope that there's a melee option there. And you can look around the galaxy a little bit in advance to see whether there are going to be melee options at nearby research stations. So basically I put a bit more thought into the whole tech setup as well. Let's just keep ranting. I think it's finally time that somebody here mentioned these tooltips. I think I did mention them before. This was my first impression of the game, that the tooltips were absolutely out of control. And somebody commented when I said I was going to play AI Wars that they expected me to rant about those tooltips. Well, somehow I didn't so far, because I was just sort of nonplussed by them. I was basically not even looking at them because they're so insane. But yes, the tooltips are absolutely out of control. You can even hold buttons down to make the tooltips be more out of control. They're so basically formatted, covered in information, no clear arrangement. Really needs like some design to come in here to sort that stuff out. Maybe it shouldn't even all be on the same tooltip, I don't know. But essentially there is sometimes really important information on those tooltips, including things like what techs upgrade certain ships. Quite hard to see at a glance or even find out that it's there at all. Well, anyway, we progress on with a new strategy of taking out enemy distribution nodes, which gives you science and hack points without having to capture systems. I was doing this before, but now it's going to be one of our main ways to actually get those resources. And we're going to use that to tech up a little bit, while still not advancing the AI progress. Now you see me here spamming down tons of turrets and surrounding them with force fields. Here's an example of something that's only in the tooltips that's really important. If you watch the tooltip flashing up for a force field right there, it says that having a force field causes everything inside it to do half the usual damage. And this might actually be the footage of me reading it for the first time when it's on the screen for a few more seconds and being like, oh, is that really the case? Because that's a huge deal. If your number is actually half the number it says it is, because I'd always put force fields around everything thinking that was a good idea, well, that could explain why it's hard to defend. Because the force field basically gives you extra health and you get more the closer you are to the middle of the force field. So there's a pretty strong meta to actually not build your attacking infrastructure inside the force fields. Well, I spent the whole campaigns so far not noticing that and assuming the opposite would be the case just because that seems more natural. Another case where it's a communication issue, really, where now I know the truth, but it might have been better if it was easier to know the truth. Essentially, that's what I'm saying. And that's what I'm also going to be saying about this golem I'm capturing here. There are two things to mention that's all in this wild tooltip. First, it mentions two very important things. One is that it costs AI progress to capture this ship. I did know by this stage that some ships did cost it and was knowing to look out for it in the tooltips. Sometimes capturing a ship inflicts extra AI progress on top of the progress already made for unlocking the system. And the other thing it costs is resources. We actually don't have enough metal, the generic currency, to capture the ship. And this is another language twist up, like the whole hack build crossover. Capturing and building are also crossed over. That is to say, when you capture a ship, while the ship's already there, it's kind of like you build it on the spot. So it takes a long time and you have to spend the resources to make the ship for the first time. Which raises the question, of course, like with the hack thing, of if you want it to be like that, why don't you actually have it be that you build it? Why even describe it as capturing and have it already be there on the map in its unbuilt state? I don't know, it just seems very unusual, a combination of different mechanics or ideas that just makes things a little bit harder to understand, and I don't think there's any upside to doing it like this. Now here's another new gameplay discovery, which I'm not sure when I realized this. I think I thought about it while looking at my footage of the second campaign and decided to try this in my third campaign. I'm here to capture this AI data node, the thing that before caused me so much trouble because they're so easy to just lose while you're not paying attention. Well, now I've realized you can actually make your base anywhere in the system. What I thought before was that you had to make your base over the planet or near the middle, basically. Only because that's how it was in the tutorial, but indeed, you can put all of your stuff out in the corner, which is much better, and in many situations this is far superior of a setup, because it changes the directions the enemy have to go to get to your critical stuff. And essentially, you can defend in one direction by being in the corner and just surrounding your corner base with all of the defenses. We can layer force fields over the things we want to survive, and then put tons of turrets outside of the force fields, in such a way that the enemy would have to go through our big wall and maze of turrets to get to the sensitive areas. In this case, they do attack this system soon after, but my fleet's still here to defend while I'm building things up. But basically, this, on top of the force field halving damage discovery, is going to dramatically increase the power of defenses with our new building strategy. And all I wonder is, should I have known that the whole time? Like, in the developer's point of view, is this something that was intended to be learned as you went along? Or did they actually tell me that up front and I didn't notice? Or do they think they've told me that up front, but it wasn't told enough? Well, there's possibly a criticism either of the game or of me to be made here, and I'm not sure which it is at this stage. But here's something we'll certainly criticize about the game. We're doing that thing again. This happens every time you go into a system, as mentioned, and I haven't been showing it because there's been so much else to say. But it's a bit of micro you have to do. One thing I'm really mad about is that you can't say, take your fleet and order them to just secure a system in all of the ways that doesn't increase AI progress. Because when you enter a system, you have to go there manually and micro the units. You have to tell them to not attack and to move towards where it looks like the enemy are going to retreat from, or to, so that you can take out as many of the enemies as possible. And then once that first phase is over, you press V on the keyboard, and the fleet will just clear out the system in the way that I wanted to originally. And you don't have to look at it, but I often do because it's nice to just not be pressing anything on the keyboard and see progress happening before you, nice and satisfying, the fruits of your labors being harvested to some extent. Well, anyway, you can't quite do that like I want because you have to do this random race to the wormholes at the start of every encounter. And I just don't think it's fun at all. It's really annoying. It's unsatisfying to see the enemy just going away, knowing that you'll now have to fight them again somewhere else. And you can sort of see the game design logic behind it. It's totally a thing. But the fact there's only one strategy to stop it from happening, and that it's kind of annoying to implement, and that it happens so many times during the campaign, makes me think it might be nicer if it just never happened, or perhaps only happened now and again. And if you wanted nearby systems to effectively become stronger by having more units in them after you've gone into a nearby system, it could just be that it builds them in response or something. It's not that they're fleeing from you and you have to take the opportunity to stop them. Essentially, I'm mad that I'm not good enough at stopping the enemy. I think it might be nicer if it wasn't constantly giving me this test of how good I am at chasing the enemy, because even though there are plenty of ways in the game to deal with that problem, I don't think it's very fun at all, and it's a direct distraction from the thing that I think is fun, that is securing the system and then moving on to do whatever else you wanted to do, and having the option to automate the securing of the system without it causing more and more problems the more you do it, which is the current setup. At least, looks like our defensive setup over here around the node is going well, although perhaps I hadn't learned that force field thing yet because half my turrets are inside the force fields right now. Maybe I was going for a balanced setup at first. We'll see later in the campaign we're going to abandon that idea entirely. I should also note that it was during this campaign that upon the analysis of the tech tree I was doing, looks like it's there on the left all the time for half this footage, I essentially realized you can upgrade your so-called station keepers, which are the units that are limited to being in one system, that are linked to a station. Basically, they're non-static, static defenses. You can upgrade them really cheaply, so that's a way to massively increase the number of all of your defenses. And you can spend a lot of science, make a very expensive upgrade, to make turrets stronger. It's a little bit confusing. You can see on the left there, for example, there's a set of text called hull, where it says light, medium, heavy, turret. What I think actually happens, if you say upgrade your turret hull, which I eventually did, that expensive 9,000 science upgrade, it upgrades their guns, not their hull, but also upgrades their hull. Essentially, if you upgrade something about a unit, it just levels up. So these techs aren't for something specifically, they're just contributing to the unit leveling up as a whole, and all of their stats will go up when that happens. At least, that's what I think it does. I can't tell, and I guess I'll just say that I can't tell is a problem. I think the tech system, as well as kind of looking messy, that menu, is a tiny bit more complicated than it really is. It looks more complicated than it really is. There might be a way to simplify that and achieve something that is equally strategic, but a bit nicer to use. And there it is, we're entering this system, everything's running away, I'm madly chasing after them. Doesn't quite work because everything's moving at different speeds, and giving a move order to go to a wormhole generally just makes the transports go there and get shot on their own because they can't fight, and then everything else tries to catch up. I'm kind of just trying to make a distraction, like, please enemy, don't leave, I don't want to have to chase you down or go do a defensive battle somewhere because of this. In this case, my defenses are now good enough, due to both my skill and understanding of the game increasing, and because the number of places I need to defend is so low with this strategy, that it doesn't matter too much if the enemy have roaming fleet. They've got 150 roaming number, theoretically enough to actually go and take down our home system if they really tried, but because it tends to be spread out over various places, and I've done my best to stop it going up as much as it could have been going up, we're probably okay. At least, we didn't encounter any major issues with it in this particular campaign. Who knows what it is that the AI decides to do with these units. Maybe because we're at the lower difficulty, it's choosing not to punish me with the units it has available to do so. So much for not ranting constantly. It seems that every time something happens, I just have to ask myself, did I like it or not? I don't understand if I like the game, and I'm stuck here in my post-commentary, just trying to work it out in retrospect. Well, I played a lot of the game, so I guess I liked it at least that much. Well, let's look now at what I'm actually doing in the gameplay world. I'm trying to get to the bottom right-hand corner of the map, because the AI is probably there. We actually can't see where the AI is right now, because you have to take a certain number of systems before it reveals the entire map, and you're not allowed to go to places that aren't revealed on the map, so you do have to get the map revealed somehow, although you can do it by hacking instead of capturing things, although you have to capture things to be able to hack, so I don't know if that's going to work out in the long run. Basically, I need 1 or 2 more systems before I'll be able to go and attack the AI. Although in this campaign, I think I did actually hack the AI's homeworld, or where I presumed it was going to be, to avoid having to capture 1 extra system at some point. Well anyway, what I did right now was abandon my attack, because we're back at it again, going back to defend against attacks against our territory on the other side of the galaxy. I actually need to do this because we are on the economic edge. We only have just enough power, enough pop cap to have our fleet. We need to keep everything alive for the duration of the attack. So I have to go back and at least make everything be alive before I start the attack. There was another delay because of an Instigator base spawning, so we go out to take that thing down, and then you can see the AI troops nearby are fleeing the system in 2 directions, so I start chasing them down to stop them coming back to haunt me. We need things to be as stable as possible while I'm going to be away from home in the corner of the map. Now here we are, getting to it. Fortunately, there were 2, I think, AI data centers in this area, so I can reduce the AI progress a bit as we go in to make our attacks. The process of taking down an AI gives you somewhere between 100 and 150 AI progress, so about a mark's worth basically. So we need to be not really close to going up to Mark 2 to avoid the risk of actually going up to Mark 3 during the process. And ideally, I wanted to stay to Mark 1 if that was at all possible for at least most of the process. So we've got the leeway now to do that. Here was a random discovery I made late in the game. The force fields in this system are in the wrong place. They're supposed to be defending the station and the nearby metal generator, but instead they're just off on their own. This led me to realize that the force fields are actually a movable building of sorts. They very slowly move about if you give them an order, so at some point I must have accidentally box selected them and told them to go over there with the main fleet or something, and there they were. So now we know that. I feel like there's stuff you can do with it, because those force fields physically repel enemy units, so you could do things like block wormholes or something using them, I think. Anyway, that aside, too late for strategies now. It's time to just outnumber the AI. We have more than 200 number after all of my hacking, with still only 3 combat ships. So this seems to be a pretty useful discovery, this whole just put everything inside the same couple of transports. Works pretty well, there appears to be no downside to doing this, and we've got loads of number with only AI Mark 1, so we're way more powerful than the AI. That said, the things we have to fight, the dire guard posts and the AI itself, start the game at maximum level, so we're going after them while under-leveled, as it were in some cases, but we have enough total number to grind through those situations and win the fights anyway. Plus I do have my combat factory following the fleet, which basically means every time you lose a ship it just gets rebuilt. This is a quite slow process, but we've got time. This is another thing I came to realize in this campaign. If you sit around and do nothing waiting for your fleet to come back, the AI doesn't seem to punish you too much for that, at least not at this stage in the game's progression of difficulties, it seems. Here's me actually taking this AI Bastion world because I wanted to have some more base infrastructure right next to the enemy's home world, so that if the attack went poorly, I could keep going back to a nearby base, and it means the factories in that adjacent system will constantly build things in the enemy's home system, because factories somehow work over a 2-system range. There was another data center to take out during my conquest of one particular Bastion world system, so that sort of makes up for the fact I spent some AI progress to put a base nearby as well, but we still do go up to AI Mark II before we finish taking out the dire guard posts. The posts themselves can't get any stronger, so it doesn't really make this part of the campaign harder. It just means elsewhere across the map we're now going to be attacked by harder stuff, and we are actually on the verge of losing this system back here, and we are still in an economic position where losing any of our systems would cause us to no longer be able to produce things, and I do need to constantly produce things to carry on my spam war against the AI in the corner. So I was hoping to somehow hold those places on the other side of the galaxy. In the meantime, we just keep rushing down the AI Overlord, and here it is getting shot at for the Phase 1 kill. I think we're in a very efficient situation, economically at least, because we're just skimming the edge of being unable to do things, which is sort of the perfect place to be. We're spending all of our resources fully here. We're getting the most out of what we have, and we're somehow not losing what we have. So there you go, there's Phase 1 of the AI fight over. Then comes the more annoying Phase 2, where we wait for it to be somewhere else. Eventually it is somewhere else, and we're allowed to attack it again. It's actually in a system that's full of other enemies, and because all of the defending units in places have leveled up as well with the AI mark going up, it's now less plausible for us to freely move around the galaxy ignoring defending forces, which it certainly was at AI Mark 1 because we had become so powerful. But anyway, we do take down the Overlord. We avoid going all the way up to AI Mark 2, so we've still got a bit of AI space to use for our fight against the other Overlord, which will now begin. But there's a big change that happens after taking out one of the AIs that's going to make the rest of the campaign somewhat easier and much more fun, in my own opinion. That is that the AI spawns keep happening, which at first is like, oh god, I thought at least taking out the Overlord would stop them spawning units. No, they still spawn units. However, they fight the other AI, at least sometimes. It's now sort of a three-way fight. There's the rogue purple AI fighting both us and the orange AI. But the purple AI, for the most part, borders the orange AI because they're all over the place. So from now on, most of the spawning attacks didn't come against us. The AI just fought the other AI. They take out each other's defending units. This doesn't change AI progress at all, so we can just ignore the whole thing. And it gives you more gameplay time, effectively, to be focusing on doing other things. This accelerates the pace of the campaign quite a bit, and I really liked this last section, our new war against the orange AI. While the orange AI is now stronger than before, the fact that you're not facing infinite supplies of spawning units just makes everything fall into place, which makes me feel that my sort of hesitance to accept that being a mechanic earlier on was better placed, because I got to experience at the end what the game's like if it's not really happening very much. And indeed, I did feel it was more enjoyable because there's no pace breaker happening. You feel like you can say, well, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, if I do this then I'll be able to do this. You have this chain of things you can start going down, and the chain isn't broken by something that doesn't feel very connected to the rest of the game, that being just things spawning. And by connection I mean like, it's not spawning because the AI has some ability to do so that you can interact with. It just happens. It's sort of a meta gameplay balance thing. You're just supposed to fight also an infinite supply of enemies on the side of the original serving of enemies, because that's the game in a meta sense. Well, without it there, I do think it's a bit better. At least this one example felt better to me. And what we're going to do strategically with the reprieve all of this grants us is to take over data centers or destroy data centers to try and get the AI progress down so that we can possibly avoid going to Mark III while fighting the other AI. So we've got something to do, and I can actually do it. This is the thing I seemed to be complaining about earlier, where I felt like I had something I wanted to do but I couldn't do it. Now we are doing the thing, and it's gameplay that feels like you're progressing the game, basically. There's another example of the AIs fighting each other, the orange AI spawning against purple, and they've just taken each other out, wiping each other clean in systems. All those little white circles you sometimes see are like the wrecks of ships, or they're supposed to be in some way. I think you can send engineers to pick them up to get extra metal or something. Anyway, the point is, now that they're fighting each other, I'm going to be having a grand old time playing myself a strategy game and pulling off some strategies. Although, that said, when I say strategies, we start to reveal now that things are becoming calmer, that maybe there aren't that many strategies, and that maybe my initial impression of this game as having a lot of strategic options and being interesting because it makes you make unusual decisions becomes a limitation, because the way in which those decisions are unusual is that they are limited. It's that the game is trying to get you to not do things rather than to do particular things. So with so few things that you can do, the actual number of possible ways a campaign can go does become limited in a way, and I sort of realized this in this third campaign. I was like, well, this is what it looks like if it goes well, but wouldn't it always look like this and feel like this if it went well? So is it actually the case that we've got a strategy game where the game is essentially working out that there only is one viable strategy, and now that we've done it here in this campaign effectively, it's like, well, what else should I do? Because I don't feel like if I played another campaign, I would want to do anything at all different to this, and the only difference would be that the puzzle of the order of the planets you take, where the numbers are, and the balance of numbers would be a bit different. It's sort of like it becomes a Sudoku puzzle, essentially, and once you know how to play the game, every other game you play of it will be essentially just a variant on the same thing. That's not necessarily a bad thing. People seem to like playing Sudoku over and over again. But I don't know, I think when I started this game, I imagined there was more to it, simply because I didn't understand it and because it was challenging my idea of what a strategy game should be like. But I ended up coming full circle by this third campaign and thinking, well, now that I know what it is, I still severely and dearly wish that it was different, and I sort of wish it was more normal, because you'd have more options for what to do, or perhaps more importantly, Because it feels satisfying to make a continuous block of territory and to fight economic warfare and things like that. I kind of like space game 4X stuff, even though it is tropey. So this non-tropey version, fun at first, but then I start to think, well, it's fun because it's missing what the other games have, not necessarily because it has something the other games are severely missing themselves. As you might be able to tell, I don't quite know what I'm talking about here. I feel like my analysis of this game has become sufficiently annoying to myself that I'd have to actually write it down to even work out what I think about this game. So the vibes I'm giving off are about all you have to go on here, on whether I actually liked this game or not, or whether you would like it or not. It's a different kind of strategy game, but I constantly wondered whether the differences were good, and I varied massively over the course of my time playing it on thinking whether they were good or not. What a gigantic mess this video has become. In case you don't know, the way I make these videos is I just start talking for about 5 minutes at the start of every day to warm up my voice. And every day I seem to have a different opinion on this game, so I'm just collecting all these clips of me playing it and saying different things about it every time, and generally it comes out as a rant. It might be because this game is so detailed in what you do moment to moment. You can't really talk about what's happening in the game because there's too much to talk about effectively. Well, here's something I did. I found this great system to capture, which is not only next to the core worlds of the AI Overlord we need to fight next, but one of the command center things is here, the AI control centers that you need to hold. And we can position our defenses such that even though the system has tons of wormholes leading into it, they'll all have to go through the same small block of defenses to reach that command thing, so they probably won't. That's the sort of defensive insight that I was really lacking so far, I think. Just being able to effectively make a choke point anywhere by utilizing the fact you can build things anywhere in systems and building turrets outside of force fields, as mentioned. So our defenses in this campaign have been much stronger, and also, as mentioned, we get attacked much less in this very calm second half of the campaign where I'm basically just doing whatever I want, whenever I want, and making plans and pulling them off, and it felt very fun. So we do some hacking to make our number bigger, we spend some science to make our number bigger, eventually our number is big enough that it's bigger than any of the enemy's numbers, and if you know anything about games where it's wars between numbers, the bigger number tends to win. So we can use our bigger number to do anything. However, we're actually going to see a subtlety here, because to enter the enemy's territory from our new position, we have to go into this place that has a super weapon, the AI Eye, as it's called, a confusing name. This is a weapon that only activates if you attack the system with more number than is in the system. So you want to try and attack with a small force, so I'm trying to do that. The game is now warning me that exogalactic units are spawning. I figured that was happening the whole time because it kept saying they were in the top right. So I don't know what that was about. Maybe more things are spawning, although I don't remember seeing them in this campaign. Anyway, so we're attacking with not all of our fleet here. The idea is you go in and you take out the guard posts, because until you do that, the super weapon is immortal. So you try to make it not immortal and then kill it before it activates and wipes out your fleet. There is an obvious problem with this though. You can see our fleet, while going after the guard posts, is killing enemy ships in the area and taking out the guard posts themselves. Both of those things reduce the enemy's number, so basically the enemy is getting weaker. So if I'm not also microing my ships to constantly be leaving the system during the battle, eventually we'll get to the point when our number is still bigger than their number, and we do reach that point and start getting annihilated by this thing. Now I was going to retreat and then come back later with my fully fledged fleet. However, I actually can't retreat from that system. The reason is there's a gravity generator there, some sort of other special building that's very uncommon, and I pretty much didn't notice it until later. It's that curly thing you can see there. It means that only ships of a certain weight class or something can leave the system. There was some rule it imposes upon you that in effect meant I was stuck here. So I had to just sit here being shot by the super weapon, losing ships. However, because we're next to one of our own systems, that long-range factory thing comes into play. Our ships are constantly respawning because they're being built in the next system, and they just basically teleport to position when they're spawning in this fashion. So we have constant ships appearing here. The fight goes on, and we'll eventually win, essentially. We can just out-economy this system by rebuilding everything all the time. And I sent the rest of my ships in to help eventually. So that was an interesting engagement. We eventually win. Unfortunately, an instigator base spawned during that time, so we'll have to go and deal with that. But at least I wasn't leaving to go and deal with other things during that fight. Exactly the sort of situation where, because it takes more than 5 minutes to do something, you can't know you're going to do it without being interrupted there. But now in the second half of the campaign, you can, and that's just straight up nice. Eventually, we're moving on to attack the enemy, so we'll just have to move through the bastion systems, taking out the guard posts as before, and also as before, doing this thing where I quickly rush down the wormhole points that it looks like the enemy might try to leave through, so we can stop them from going and regrouping with a bigger fleet somewhere else, that sort of thing once again. And we don't have to leave when we get attacked. Our defenses are there. This is the dream that I speculated would be possible earlier in the video, where if the enemy spawns a wave against you, which they often don't at this stage, when they do, you don't have to do anything. They pop in and your good defenses take them out. Although it's not necessarily just our good defenses, it's the fact that we're still only at AI Mark 2 out of 7. We're still facing the second weakest possible invasions, so we really can get away with it, and I've spent more of my pop cap on defenses. So later, we're ready to fight the AI, we take it down for the first time here, and this worked out absolutely perfectly, because after we kill it, we're still at AI Mark 2 with 1 point remaining, and we are going to be able to not get any more progress before the end of the game. So basically, we managed to do the entire thing at AI Mark 2. All we have to do is wait for it to move somewhere again and then kill it again, which will be fine. There was this last minute attack where they're spawning a more powerful than usual wave against our home system. And even though our home system has 4 times the number needed to defend it, as we saw before, if a couple of ships just sort of run past your stuff and shoot your command center, you can still just lose the campaign suddenly. Fortunately, that didn't happen. I've got the place surrounded by tractor beams because I was paranoid about that happening. So actually enemies can't go near our command center or our home system center as it is. And here we are fighting the AI again. Just have to wait to gradually kill it. It has tons of health, so even with all of our number combined, it's hard to kill it. But it can't really do much back to us, and it's just slowly meandering about doing whatever it's trying to do. That's the end of that, and that is effectively the end of this campaign. And I think it's finally time to end this video as well. I still wanted to end it with some kind of rant, although I'm not quite sure what at this stage, because this is now about a week after I stopped playing AI Wars 2 as I commentate this. I'm trying to put together what are my final thoughts on this game. It's a game that is counterintuitive, but in a good way, and I have many other confusing sentiments like that about it, where it's sort of unfun in a good way, it's stressful but in a good way, things like that. It's very much a hybrid game, and I often think maybe it would have been better if it had gone more in one of the 2 directions it's kind of going in now. Those 2 directions being either being a 4X space game where you paint and map your color and capture dots in the traditional sense, or a kind of nomadic guerrilla war style game where you're not doing that and instead you're doing behind enemy lines action. We have this hybrid where you're punished for both taking territory and for doing behind enemy lines action. And I guess punished is the word to focus on here. It's a game where every time you do something, it's kind of bad. And this is sort of a way of thinking about it, I suppose. It's how you look at it. Because you could say taking a system that does the least possible harm, or making a capture that does the least possible harm to your cause, is a good strategy, whereas I perceive it to be the least bad strategy. So because I look at the game in this way, almost everything you can do is just causing the least bad thing for you to happen while still being able to play the game. So I'm like thinking, well, it would be more fun if we could somehow just do progress, and there's no downside to doing a bit of progress. That's what I want to see. You could even just throw that in as a bolt-on mechanic, do a sort of get out of jail free card system where it just says, I will not let the AI see me do this thing, and give you the chance to now and again just do a thing for free. I'm going to take the system because I want to, and I'll be able to do that, progress whatever my plan might be, and not think, has that screwed me over later? Am I soft locking the campaign in effect, or soft failing the campaign, I should say, by doing that thing that I thought was a good idea? Well, maybe just a few free passes would be nice. That's just how I feel anyway. Or at the very least, at low difficulties, it could be a bit like that. I think it would be an interesting mechanic anyway to be able to pick and choose what the AI can tell that you're doing or what they can see, so that you can focus on doing things. This is a very abstract point to make, but I just feel like there's some fun to be had and some strategy to be had by actually making the AI progress thing less annoying. And I guess the other final thought I should make is that thing I was saying earlier a bit, I think anyway. The thing where it feels like we've discovered here not just a viable strategy, but the viable strategy. And I wonder what else you could do in this game, aside from what we did in this campaign. I think I mentioned this much earlier, this idea that it's a game where you're either easily winning or you're doomed, and there's not that much in between because it's like a feedback loop kind of game, where if you start struggling, you're almost certainly going to struggle more in the future and will fail. So it feels like if you're not just steamrolling every battle like I did in this campaign, you probably should quit and try to play the game in a different way such that you are steamrolling. And maybe at higher difficulties, finding the balance where you can just about struggle on to victory and still win without taking too many systems or getting too many ships on your side to make it easier is possible in some way. Well, I don't know, because I'm not going to play at higher difficulties, and I suppose that's the final takeaway point. I don't really have any particular review of this game, because while I found it theoretically bad and the whole time kept thinking, shouldn't it be different to this? Why is it like this? I definitely had fun playing it and found it compelling to play. I wanted to play it in long sessions. So it's sort of engaging in that sense. Although I felt that sense of engagement get obliterated after finishing this campaign because of those thoughts I was talking about earlier, thinking, well, I've done it now. I could probably do it again, but I don't want to. I don't think it would be fun to do that again. And that's my ultimate review. I did think it was good. I played it for like 15 hours. Had some very bad times, some very good times, and ultimately thought, that was a good game, but I don't want to play it again. So I suppose that's where we have to leave things. That's about as reviewish as we can get. There is a lot more to the game, it seems. The harder campaigns have more things you can do in them, and you can do things like summoning extra factions, neutral factions, allied factions, to have the campaigns play out in different ways. Maybe if other smaller things were more to my liking, maybe if the UI was less confusing, maybe if they just actually simplified the game a bit, it would be more compelling to do that. I think it's a case where streamlining things could make it more strategic, because it's sort of obscure in how complex it is. It's too complex to make a strategy about. Something similar I complained about with the stats in Total War games, where because it's not necessarily possible to know what you're doing, that limits how strategic what you're doing can be at a fundamental level. Well, anyway, what am I talking about? Even I don't know, and that limits fundamentally how good this video and this analysis can be. Well, I've done what I wanted to do, that is, speak for another 5 or 10 minutes in the morning so I can go and do something else with this now slightly warmed up voice. And I recommend you go and do something else with your life, and one of those things might be play AI Wars 2, AI War 2. I think it's good enough for a certain kind of person to like it quite a lot, and for a sort of strategy game veteran like me to find it confusing, to be tempted to ricochet off the game and not play it at all, as I imagine most people did. But there's certainly some fun to be had here. I would be interested, I'll say this, in playing AI War 3. See ya.